Hey, welcome back to the most awkward web series on YouTube. I apologize for the delay. The last week of school before vacation, I lost my voice and couldn't sit for one of these. So hopefully, I'll be able to make up for it in this one. Today's discussion is going to be a little wild at times. We're going to go for a few minutes anyway, super far afield. I'm going to throw some existential absurdism at you. We're going to talk about some stuff that I wish we had time to talk about in class. Get your ideas. Maybe this could be incorporated in some kind of extra credit assignment. And then we're just going to go through the chapter like normal. So part 2 of the section is the sieve in the sand. We will get into the meaning of that, the name of the chapter later in the section. The scene starts very tense. We're just in terms of his storytelling and the trajectory of the story and the path of the story. Bradbury is in an expert way ratcheting up that tension, and we know how forbidden the books are, and we for the scene to open up with them, Guy and Mildred, actively talking about books. Meanwhile, the family is yabbering in the background, and we know that Guy's growing increasingly more guilty, and he's conflicted. We've talked about that in class, and then we've had these, the visit from Beatty. We have on page 74, under the door sill, a slow probing sniff and exhalation of electric steam. We know that the mechanical hound has been making trips out into the hood. Montag senses his presence in the section before, so we really have this a lot going on, and it only gets crazier if you can believe that. So we have this sort of back and forth between Mildred and Guy. Guy talks to her about the white clown and asks, sort of challenges her to that question, does the white clown love you? And this goes back to the Clarice discussions. And it almost also kind of plays into Beatty's manifesto of why books are banned. I mean, it's kind of like, that sophist argument. Is ignorance bliss? The more Guy is devouring these books and reading these books, the more guilty he feels, and the more he's questioning the relationship between himself and Millie. Is that a good thing? I mean, I think I asked in class, is that knowledge, is it better? Is ignorance bliss? Is it better not to know? I would ask you, would you want to know if your significant other was cheating on you? Would you really want access to that knowledge? And it's funny, when I asked that question in classes, what percentage of the students and my friends even would say, yes, I would want to know, or no, I wouldn't want to know. So, then there's also the expression, if ignorance is bliss, then knock the smile off my face. So, interesting. So, the other thing that is kind of interesting to note is that the more Guy reads, the more he becomes aware of the ever-present flight patterns of the airplanes over the house. On the bottom of page 75, he says, every hour or so, many damn things in the sky. How in hell did those bombers get up there every single second of our lives? It's something that in the first part of the book we notice, but now that, again, Guy is becoming more aware of them, it's something he's noticing even more. And it's funny that we don't really have much sense of time. Time is distorted here. That's part of a dystopian setting. But one thing we can almost count on, almost like clockwork, are these airplanes that are passing overhead. So it's almost like a disturbing way to measure time. Guy recalls on page 76, again, that old man, recollection of the old man that he encountered in the park. It says, hold on, he shut his eyes. Yes, of course. Again, he found himself thinking of the Green Park a year ago. The thought had been with him many times recently, but now he remembered how it was that day in the city park when he had seen the old man in the black suit hide something quickly in his coat. Of course, we can guess what that thing is. The old man leapt as if to run, and Montag said, wait. I haven't done anything, cried the old man, trembling. No one said you did. They sat in the green, soft light without saying a word for a moment, and then Montag talked about the weather and then told the old man responded with a pale voice. It was a strange, quiet meeting. The old man admitted to being a retired English professor who had been thrown out upon the world 40 years ago when the last liberal arts colleges shut down for lack of students and patronage. His name was Faber. And when he finally lost his fear of Montag, he talked in a cadenced voice, looking at the sky and the trees and the green park, and when an hour had passed, he said something to Montag, and Montag sensed it was a rhymeless poem. Then the old man grew even more courageous and said something else that was a poem too. Faber held his hand over his left coat pocket and spoke these words gently, and Montag knew if he reached out, he might pull back a book of poetry from the man's coat. Interesting that Guy is so out of it that he doesn't even know what a poem is anymore. That he just has this vague sense that Faber is reciting a poem to him, and that fits in with Montag's character. That latent, meaning inside, nascent, buried attachment to the other world that Clarice brings out of him. That those questions that she asks him make him start to question reality. Same thing's happening here. That Montag has this sort of vague understanding that Faber has something really important in his left coat pocket, and it might be poetry. But he did not reach out. His hand stayed on his knees, numbed and useless. I don't talk things, sir, said Faber. I talk the meaning of things. We'll get to that more in a second. I sit here and know I'm alive. It was all there was to it, really. An hour of monologue, a poem, a comment, and then without either acknowledging the fact that Montag was a fireman, Faber, with a certain trembling, wrote his address on a slip of paper. For your file, he said, in case you decide to be angry with me. So Montag at that moment takes the piece of paper and files it into a future investigations folder, which when we fast forward, Montag retrieves the information. He's going to go visit Faber now. So now we're shifting our scene from the Montag residence to this scene with Faber. Then we get into this discussion. Millie, does the white clown love you? No answer. Millie, does. He licked his lips. Does your family love you? Love you very much. Love you with all their heart and soul, Millie? He felt her blinking slowly at the back of his neck. Why'd you ask a silly question like that? So amidst all these personal, sort of groundbreaking discoveries that Montag is making, he's contending with his wife, and it's almost like comedy relief that she's just so oblivious, making up all these excuses for her family and the white clown, when all Guy wants her to do is just think about things in a meaningful way, and she can't get to that next plateau of thought, that it's been so driven out of her throughout the years that she's just incapable of that type of thought. So page 80, we get to our conception of the sieve in the sand, and we're going to go crazy here with a little philosophy. So Montag thinks back to a memory. He's on a train, and he thinks back to a memory of himself as a child. He says, I sit on the beach, page 80. Once as a child, he had sat upon a yellow dune by the sea in the middle of the blue and hot summer day, trying to fill a sieve with sand. So a sieve is, like this, right? So if you can imagine, you're trying to fill up this with sand, of course what's going to happen, right? It's going to fall at the bottom, and he realizes that he's the victim of this cruel cousin who says, I'll pay you a dime if you can do it. And so he's a kid, and he doesn't understand. So he keeps trying to fill the sieve faster and faster. He poured, the faster it sifted through with a hot whispering. His hands were tired, the sand was boiling, the sieve was empty. Seated there, in the midst of July without a sound, he felt the tears move down his cheeks. Now, as the vacuum underground rushed him through the dead cellars of town, jolting him, he remembered the tragic logic of that sieve, and he looked down and saw that he was carrying the Bible open. There were people in the suction train, but he held the book in his hands, and the silly thought came to him, if you read fast and read all, maybe some of the sand will stay in the sieve. But he read, and the words fell through, and the thoughts, in a few hours there would be Beatty, and here will be me handing this over, so no phrase must escape me, each line must be memorized. I will myself to do it. So we're inching ever closer to this confrontation between Beatty and Montag. We'll talk more about that in a second. But I want to go back to this idea of the sieve in the sand. So trying to fill the sieve with sand. Really, I don't know. I could research this if Bradbury is summoning, if this is an intentional allusion to someone like Albert Camus, who you know wrote *The Stranger* and a philosophy called *The Myth of Sisyphus*, which I'm going to refer to now. In *The Myth of Sisyphus*, he talks about the absurd reasoning, and the basic conception of it is that there is there's nothing to life other than what we make out of it. That every time life is a search for meaning in a meaningless world, or life is a search for meaning in a universe that seems to actively reject our attempts to figure it out. So as soon as we figure something out, really, what does that do? Every time we solve an equation, sorry, it's Faber. Every time you figure something out, all it's going to do is instigate 5 more questions. So in The Absurd Reasoning, Camus writes, he's talking about this guy Karl Jaspers, but anyway, he says, when Jaspers revealing the impossibility of constituting the world as a unity, exclaims, this limitation leads me to myself, where I can no longer withdraw behind an objective point of view that I am merely representing, where neither I myself nor the existence of others can any longer become an object for me. So what Jaspers is arguing is we can't figure out the universe because the universe is beyond the extent of our individual brains. So really, when we search the universe, we're really searching for the end of human knowledge. That once we progress, or once we really understand that life is just, that all knowledge is just all human experience, and that there's way more than human experience, there's way more out there than we can understand. So if we come to this realization that even if we solve everything, all we're really solving is the extent of humans, of the extent of human knowledge, and that's nothing in comparison. That's into the infinite universe, right? Even if somehow we could know all the things humans were supposed to know, that's still nothing. So Jaspers says that life is limited, or meaning is limited, because there kind of is a limit to meaning. That the limit to meaning is the limit to our ability to understand ourselves. Once we get to that extent of ourselves, that's it. But the universe continues. So that's a strikingly profound, thought, a realization to have. And that type of logic stretches back into lots of different philosophical schools. Soren Kierkegaard in *Sickness Unto Death* talks about that there's 3 types of people in the world. He talks about people that don't know that they have. He was religious. His father was very religious. So Kierkegaard thought of everything in a Christian framework. He says, some people never realize that life is about a relationship with God, or trying to establish a relationship with God. And those people, forget them because they don't know. Then there's another 2 types of people. Then there are people who spend their lives trying to commune or to be close to God through prayer or religious service or meditation or sacrifice, whatever it is. And within that group of people, some people tragically sort of will come to an understanding that the more you try to commune to God or with God, the more the distance between yourself and God there will be. And that's a remarkably frustrating thought for someone who's devoutly religious and spends their whole life searching, for a relationship with their God, only to find that the more they progress towards that path, the more they try to know God, the farther and more distant that relationship will be, because God is infinite, of course, and man is not. So that third type of person, he is what Kierkegaard calls despair. He says that we are in despair when we come to this moment of realization that the more we try to know God, the farther away we are from God. More modern, non-Christian approaches, we talked about this in class a little bit, but that notion of, you're walking down the street and you're by yourself and you're not on your phone for once, and you notice the sunset, or you notice some just interplay of lights, or the warm feeling of the rain, and it's such a striking feeling, and you don't know why, but you're moved by it, and you stop and you take whatever you can in, but then that's gone, right? We call it the moment. So that moment is where you're the suchness of humanity, the soul, whatever you want to call it, If you want to use a religious framework, that's fine. That's totally your understanding. But once we take a step back and think about what just happened, again, just like Kierkegaard talking about the people trying to get close to God, the people that try to understand what just happened to me, why was I moved, the minute you start thinking about it, it couldn't be farther away from you. That it's over, and it's again one of those limitations of humanity is that we'll never understand what that was. Okay, so I'm hoping, like I said, this is a little bit far afield, but I think it still has some merit here. So then we come to this third understanding, and this is from Camus, and going back to the absurd reasoning, he says, sorry. He is evoking, after many others, those waterless deserts where thought reaches its confines. So, imagining existence without meaning as a desert, that if there's nothing to reality, there's no meaning, that you're never going to find the end of the desert, that it's absurd, it's silly, why even try? So he's saying some people find that. Jasper said, why even try? We're never going to find the end of the universe because all we're really doing is searching for ourselves. Well, Camus has a little bit of a problem with that. He says, after many others, indeed, but how eager they were to get out of them. They were trying to get out of the desert. And at last, crossword where thought hesitates, many men have arrived, and even some of the humblest. They then abdicated what was most precious to them, their life. They gave up their lives because the search for meaning was just so futile and so nonsensical and so silly and so ridiculous to even try that they gave up even trying. Others, princes of the mind, really smart people, abdicated likewise, but they initiated the suicide of their thought in its purest revolt. Now here's where sort of my philosophy comes into play, and perhaps what Guy's going to try to do at the end of this chapter. Camus writes, the real effort is to stay there, meaning the desert. Stay in that place where people are trying to get out of, or people are trying to figure out. Camus says, the real effort is to stay there, insofar that is possible, and to examine closely the odd vegetation of those distant regions. I love that. So stay in the desert and look around you. Instead of trying to, think your way out of, figure out meaning and think your way out of the desert, why not just stop and notice how beautiful the desert is? He says tenacity, meaning vigorous intellectual activity, and acumen, knowledge, are privileged spectators of this unhuman show in which absurdity, hope, and death carry on their dialogue. The mind can then analyze the figures of that elementary yet subtle dance before illustrating them and reliving them itself. So Camus is describing this state where mankind, you're when you're trying to figure things out, you're dumping knowledge, you're trying to fill this up with knowledge, but what's happening is that it's coming out the bottom of the sieve. But in a way, is there a beauty to that? Is there something amazing about that? Is there something stunning and remarkably human about that process? If we didn't do that, we wouldn't be human. That's what defines us. So rather than be sad about that, or rather than be limited by that, that thought that is sort of freeing. So anyway, Beatty or Montag is anticipating this impending conflict with Beatty, and he knows he just got his butt kicked the first time, where he was 1 second away from pulling the book out from behind the pillow and just giving it all up. So he seeks out this guy Faber. He and Faber come up with an interesting plan. Faber gets into his philosophy. So just like Beatty, I want you to go back, and we're going to talk about this in class, but I want you to go back and review Beatty's conception of the evil of books, and I'm going to have us compare his conception with Faber's conception. So he goes basically from 84 to 88 about is Faber kind of giving an equally long-winded view and analysis of the power of books and how they're, it's not really the books, it's the knowledge of the books and the interaction with the books, the process of the books. So again, just like the desert, right? It's not the book, it's the beauty of interacting with knowledge. And books just happen to be one way, shape, or form that they come in. So he also talks about the radio and television could also be forms that knowledge could be broadcasted, just like a book, which makes sense now that we know what TV is used for now in this dystopian reality. It's not like you're watching PBS or Sesame Street and teaching children. You're substituting an existence and being fed lies about your family and the white clown. So this is another element of that dystopia where Faber's saying that we could have used the radio and TV and all these forms of technology just like we used books to transmit knowledge, and that process would have been beautiful, but the government has done away with that. So he goes into his three he says, page 87, only if the third necessary thing could be given us. Number one, as I said, quality of information. Okay, so interesting in an era of fake news. Bradbury is very, just like he anticipated reality television, is Bradbury anticipating the advent of fake news, where one political party gets its weather from one channel and another political party needs its weather from the other channel, and they can't agree either if it's raining or if it's sunny outside. So number one, I said quality of information. Number two, leisure to digest it. And that's interesting. Leisure to digest it. Between the sleeping pills and the family and having her friends over, someone like Mildred never has the opportunity to ponder life, right? Beatty talks about that hour in the morning when you're getting ready for work. If we can fill up our day with just distractions, just stuff that makes you not think, I think that's an interesting way to distract people, to make so people don't ever engage in that deep, natural, beautiful thinking. And number three, the right to carry out actions based on what we learn from the interaction of the first two. So having time to think about quality information is going to lead to action. And if we can, what society has done is interrupted that process, it leads to Millie, basically. And then a little bit down the line on 87, it says, that's the good part of dying. When you've nothing to lose, you run any risk you want. And that gets us back to Camus, right? If you recognize that there's, life isn't about trying to escape the desert or trying to solve and find meaning or, find the limits of the universe. If you give up that that's even something that we should be trying to do, you can start to notice the beauty of life. And you can start living life. Maybe capture some of that sand in the sieve. So moving on, getting to the end of the chapter here. So Faber and Montag devise this plan. It's kind of a shiesty plan. He wants to perhaps, Faber's going to have a little implant in Guy's ear, and he's going to be whispering lines from books that he's memorized to try to combat Beatty when Montag and Beatty eventually get into their upcoming argument. So the idea is that, if Beatty could be tempted from his lofty role as fire chief, if he could join their cause, if he could somehow convince him that, knowledge and books are worth saving and not burning, we'd have a very powerful ally. 2, printing press, okay, creating and distributing more knowledge. And 3, taking books and putting them in firefighters' houses to discredit them. That's their plan. So meanwhile, back at the Batcave, we have one more little incursion here into the Montag headquarters on page 96. Mildred has her friends over, and while they're having this conversation, this vicious, gruesome imagery is playing in the background. It says, on one wall, a woman smiled and drank orange juice simultaneously. How does she do that at once? Thought Montag insanely. In the other walls, an x-ray of the same woman revealed the contracting journey of the refreshing beverage on its way to her delighted stomach. Abruptly, the room took off on a rocket flight into the clouds and plunged into a lime-green sea where blue fish ate red and yellow fish. A minute later, 3 white cartoon clowns chopped off each other's limbs to the accompaniment of immense incoming tides of laughter. 2 minutes more, and the room whipped out of town to jet cars wildly circling an arena, bashing and backing up and bashing each other again. Montag saw a number of bodies fly in the air. What could be happening here? Again, this is dystopia, right? Faber just said, what if we use TVs to transmit knowledge rather than this disturbing imagery? What would be the effect on a population of seeing severed limbs and hearing laughter when you see the severed limbs? Again, is Bradbury anticipating world star hip hop? Where perhaps society that is desensitized or inured or has gotten used to terrible, terrible instances of violence, would they be more tolerant of perhaps their husbands not coming home from the war? One of the women says, In again, out again, Finnegan. The army called Pete yesterday. He'll be back next week. The army said so. Quick war, 48 hours, they said, and everyone home. That's what the army said. Quick war. Pete was called yesterday, and they said he'd be back next week. Quick. I mean, just even her response, like she keeps repeating, he's going to be back again. He's going to be back again. It doesn't bother her at all. That and we know from Guy Montag noticing all the planes every day, multiple times a day, that the war doesn't seem to be ending. It seems to be perhaps ratcheting up. Are we ever going to see Pete again? Does she even care? Then on page 98, there's this interesting thing about children, which is reflective of the first, it was a pleasure to burn. That whole first paragraph where we have the inversion of purposes of things. And you can go back to that first page. We talked about that in class and in the first video. But she talks about how children are ruinous. Children are ruinous. That she even had a cesarean section, even though the doctor said she was perfectly capable of, having natural birth, because she didn't want to ruin her figure. We can talk about that some other point, but I think you get at what Bradbury is saying there. But again, just considering children as ruinous when the intended purpose of children is to be uplifting, and children are the next generation, and they are redemptive, and they're cyclical, and they're the future. But here they are referred to as ruinous, and that goes back again to our in a dystopia, the purpose of things, the uses of things are inverted, are flipped, are corrupted or bastardized. Everything from animals to even now children to, the hound, different types of animals. So anyway, the scene ends with a very tense interaction between the women and Montag and Mildred and Faber, who is screaming. And if you can imagine this scene, right? So Montag has got his own voices, wanting to, yell out about books and to snap these dumb women out of their idiotic reverie. And then you've got Faber's voice screaming in his ear, no, no, no. And then you have these terrible images in the background of the white clowns hacking each other. And then you have the women, and you have Mildred, and you have, it's beautiful how this confluence of this chaotic events are sort of, rushing us to the end of this chapter. And he eventually ends with this, with Dover Beach by this guy, Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold is very famous for being sort of a humanist. Means he loves humans, believes in the inherent goodness of humans. All of his writing is about, redemption and friendship, and how, camaraderie and brotherhood can get us through the darkest of days. In the poem here, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorance armies clash by night. And the poem is really about how the only way out of a dark plain is through friendship, power of friendship, power of love, redemption and love. So it's an interesting poem to read to a room full of people who are inhabitants of the dark plain and see no reason to try to make anything better of themselves. On page 103, Ms. Bowles is done with it. She kind of reflects Beatty's worldview as a lifestyle. You see, I knew it. That's what I wanted to prove. I knew it would happen. I've always said poetry and tears, poetry and suicide and crying and awful feelings, poetry and sickness, all that mush. Now I've had it proved to me. You're nasty, Mr. Montag. You're nasty. All right. So the chapter ends with the inevitable confrontation between Beatty and Montag, with Faber in his ear, and he enters the scene on page 107, Montag, and I love this, right? Beatty looks up from his card game and says, "Well," he said to the men playing cards, "here comes a very strange beast, which in all tongues is called a fool." And that's a line from Shakespeare's play, As You Like It. This is Hamlet, but this is from As You Like It. And then Beatty's words, right? I mean, almost the worst thing you can do is someone who's gifted sophist. Going back to the tradition of the snake in the garden, the rhetoric that Satan as snake kicks to Eve over, in the Garden of Eden is what Bradbury is drawing on here is that, you know, the devil can quote scripture in order to trick mankind, to trick mortals into doing evil, to doing sin. And Beatty, again, sounds convincing, and he is a rhetorical master, and everything Montag thinks he knows, every line that he has thought he's memorized, and all favors help, doesn't matter, because Beatty has a response, and Beatty has way more knowledge, and has read more books, and knows, even more dangerously, perhaps has been where Montag has been at this point as a young firefighter, and so he knows Montag's mental state, and his just doesn't go well for Montag. And finally, at the end, when Montag is almost reduced to nothingness, to a blubbering mess with no more words, the sand is out of the sieve. On page 112, they get a call. Montag looked up. Beatty never drove. So they're on their way to a fire, or to start a fire. But he was driving tonight, so there's something different, right? Beatty, the fire chief, never drives, he's driving. So, want to know how many of you sort of guessed what was about to happen when you got to this part. But he was driving tonight, slamming the salamander around corners, leaning forward high on the driver's throne, his massive black slicker flapping out behind so that he seemed a great black bat flying above the engine, over the brass numbers, taking the full wind. Here we go to keep the world happy, Montag. Beatty's pink, phosphorescent cheeks glimmered in the high darkness, and he was smiling furiously. Here we are. The salamander boomed to a halt, throwing men off in slips and clumsy hops. Montag stood fixing his raw eyes to the cold, bright rail under the clenched fingers. I can't do it, he thought. How can I go at this new assignment? How can I go on burning things? I can't go in this place. Beatty, smelling of the wind through which he had rushed, was at Montag's elbow. All right, Montag. The men ran like cripples in their clumsy boots, as quietly as spiders. At last Montag raised his eyes and turned. Beatty was watching his face. Something the matter, Montag? Why, said Montag slowly, we've stopped in front of my house. So again, I wonder how many of you anticipated that this was going to be the end of part 2. Lots of stuff there, I know. Like I said, you can get as deep and philosophical with this as you want, or you can just, appreciate just the good story that Bradbury's telling. Again, that ratcheting up, that rocket-fueled tension of all the voices happening in Montag's ear, and the voices in the background, and the danger just ever present. Or you can, break this down, because clearly Bradbury, with all his illusions, has read, and you could get into the Joseph Campbell monomyth theory, which we talked about in class, where, the hero, in this case, Montag, usually in the monomyth theory, along the way, your hero typically encounters, his worst nemesis and loses at first, and requires some sort of assistance or tutorship or weapon, which he gets from Faber. He gets both. He gets the radio implant, and he gets the sort of advice. You can take that what you will. So that's why I love this book so much, and it's been fun going back and rereading this after so many years. But we'll bring this up in class a little bit. We'll have a hopefully interesting in-class assignment. This week is going to be kind of choppy with different classes going down to our assemblies, and might not be in class on Thursday, but we'll see. All right, so email me if you have any questions. Remember, double quiz on Friday, and I'll have most likely the next video for the next section of the book up tomorrow.